So getting started in coding. Programming is so complex. There are so many options. What languages should you learn? Where should you start? Well, this will hopefully give you a little bit of an idea on where we're getting started in with this. Hopefully give you some pointers just for an overview. So there's different levels of languages to look into. If you're looking at a lower level language, it's closer to what the machine is going to understand. A higher level language is closer to what a human will understand. Now, a script is a light code, so when you learn a language, a core language, and you go to look at the scripting language for it, it's usually a simplified, lighter version of that. For example, if you learn Visual Basic, then if you look at VB Script, it's going to be simplified and light based off of Visual Basic. In JavaScript, it's going to be simplified and light compared to core Java. So that's where they're that light code. Low-level languages, you're dealing with things like machine language and assembly and stuff that's just telling the processor step by step, okay, move these bits there, type of stuff like that. Just real low-level stuff. That's really useful when it comes to doing really nitty-gritty things. Building an operating system and telling the computer to, move a pointer or something like that to get started. Just real limited stuff. These low-level languages are good for. Now, to build whole, graphical user interface programs and all that, that's not really what they're for. That's the reason why we developed other languages. I will oftentimes use a lot of scripting for stuff that I'm working on all the time and continue to want to edit. A lot of times scripting runs just fine for a lot of things. Higher level codes are things like, probably Visual Basic is one of the biggest ones. That's really a higher level language that, it's written in such a way that it's just like, if this is that, then do this type of structure, where it's really designed more on like the English sentence than other languages. Like Python is still pretty easy to understand, to just look at it and read. That's kind of the concept of a higher level language. You look at it and you can tell kind of what it's meant to say. You don't have to go to a reference book like you would if you're looking at machine language or even assembly code. You probably still have to go to a reference book for some things and go, okay, why am I changing this memory address? With machine language, it's like, what does this hex value mean? What do these bits mean? What does that correspond to in a processor? Well, now we're talking machine code here. It's a lot easier to look at a word and say, oh, if, do. That's a lot easier. So that's where that high-level language comes in. And then you've got your more medium-level languages, your C, your C++, your PHP, your Java, a lot of those guys. They're kind of in the middle. They're not super human-friendly, but they're also not so computer-friendly that it takes, they're somewhere in the middle. And they all have their own purposes on that. Machine code is for where you just need to write a little bit to do something very specific. Higher level languages might not have the words to really describe that, but those words that the higher level languages will have will move a lot further, a lot faster. So let's take a look in here at the function of a language. It really tells, you're going to tell the computer how to tell the computer what to do. That's really what the purpose of what the language is. When you learn a language, you're going to be learning how to tell it what you want it to do. So in here I have some examples. Right off over in here, this is kind of an example of basic, like I said, if whatever condition is true, then, in this case it's a remark, so it wouldn't really do anything. These are examples of remarks, what I did, but a remark is to do task. So you would put the task in there that you would want it to do, and then ending if. So that's just an example here of creating a structure here that when a computer reaches this, it's only going to do whatever that do task is if whatever that condition is true. And you're going to learn those different operators are going to be different based on different languages. I wasn't going into too deep on all that. Other videos, I'm sure I'm going to go into deep stuff on different languages on this channel. But for right now, I'm really just focusing on just the overview. So that's one way of explaining to the computer what you want it to do. If true, then do the task. Then down here below, I now have, this is more of a Python way of doing it. Here we have the indent is important. So if, and then the condition true, colon, that means it's expecting an indent, and as soon as that indent disappears, the next line, if it appears in line with this, it's also going to be a part of that task. But if it comes back to the start, then it's going to be run no matter what, whether that condition was true. So the conditional block is the indented portion. As soon as that indent's gone, so I don't know, it depends on what you like on that. If you get used to that, that might be something that's, a lot of people have learned to like that in coding. I much prefer the way I actually explicitly end it. But that's one way to do that. That's Python's way of saying the same thing as what was done up here with the Visual Basic style. And then over here, this is more of how C and Java and C++ and PHP and a bunch of those other languages do it. A lot of languages do it this way. If true, in the parenthesis, and then they open up with curly braces and end that with curly braces about whatever the task is, and this comment pattern, that double slash for a single line comment. And there's some very common ways to write those comments in there for many of those languages. But none of these comments are the same across all of the different types of languages. There is not one form of a comment that works across everything. There's not one form of an if. That's a part of the language. And if this was machine code, this would just be a series of hexadecimal codes that will just, one would be the command, and then the next hexadecimal code is maybe going to be some type of perimeter for that. And then once it reaches all the perimeters, it's going to go to the next command. So I didn't really go into that too far on this. The point behind this was just really to show what was the function of the language. It's to tell it really just tells how. When you learn a language, you're learning how to tell the computer what you want it to do. Libraries, on the other hand, they're going to extend that language further and provide access to functionality. That's really where you're going to get into telling it what to do. For example, the C language, it by its core doesn't even know how to talk to the console. It doesn't even know how to talk to the basic console and do a standard console out. You have to import a library for that. Include is its word for it. They all got different words for including libraries. PHP has a lot of huge built-in libraries to it that you don't have to call for, but you can also require your own. Different ones they import, different ones there's just all kinds of different commands, but that deals with the language. So the library is where you really get into the fun of it. That's where you go, okay, I'm writing a console program, so I need to import the proper libraries to access the console. And once you learn, like say the console library, is oftentimes similar across different languages. There will be some difference in syntax which you use to access that. There will be different ways which your parentheses might be different. You might not use parentheses for certain types of calls. It might be spaces. It just depends on what your language is, but once you learn the language and once you learn the structure, how that library is, they're usually structured very similar. So what I'm kind of getting at by this is when you learn a language, you're going to learn what you need to know to tell it what to do. You're going to pick a language that is right for what type of programming you're interested in doing. I would start with a higher level one. Look towards something like Visual Basic or Python, and then work your way on it. Once you've kind of got the idea, the concept of the programming, then start working your way on into other stuff as you learn about different ones. And different ones are good for different things. Visual Basic is excellent for, it needs to be done on a Microsoft platform. I have not seen a Visual Basic interpreter for Linux. It has to be done on a Microsoft platform. But it's great for applications. It's great for creating those GUI applications. Python it's pretty well a multi-purpose script. It's useful for a lot of different applications, though, being console, GUI, games, stuff like that. Python's useful for a lot of that stuff. They're both very high-level languages, very easy to learn. You go on into things like Java, and that's more for web or Android. Java has a lot of applications to it, but those are the main points for Java. If you're working with if you're dealing with the Microsoft side of things too, they'll also work with code behinds and stuff like that, which a code behind is a piece of code that can grab a web page and manipulate it once it's been downloaded. Applets can be created for any platform. Those are cross-platform. And the really cool thing about the scripting languages like JavaScript and PHP, Python, Perl, Ruby, those guys, they work cross-platform for the most part. Unless you really do something really nitty-gritty in one, generally they're going to work very well across many different platforms. So, yeah, Java is more web-based. Getting on into C++, that's a lot of applications and stuff like that. C, it gets into smaller stuff, more like software drivers and stuff like that, is where that would be more used. PHP is heavily used in web server pages, generating a page from the server. So if you're working on building a website that needs server-side code, that's the one to use. JavaScript is generally used for client-side code in web. And there's other languages too that aren't really programming. There's also things like structured query language. That's not really a programming language. That's just more of a database access language. So also take a look at what the language is for as well. Make sure it's a programming language when you decide on it. Well, yeah, there's just many different types here, but if you're really going to get nitty-gritty and get into manipulating registers and all that, then you start needing to work with assembly and machine code and stuff like that. Generally, with assembly, you can tell what you need to for the machine code. Assembly is just a referenced machine code. So, yeah, so once you learn your language, once you pick your language, then you start figuring out what libraries you need, and you start learning the references of those libraries. And then when you decide to learn a new language, you can oftentimes import a lot of that information of those libraries over. So once you learn the graphical user interface libraries in one language, if there's a similar library in the other language, it's oftentimes very similar. If it's part of the GTK library in PHP GTK, it's very similar in structure to what you're going to find in Python. So if you work with one, you work with the other one. Now, it's very difficult to work with GTK in PHP. It takes a very special download and recompilation of it and all. Unless you're working with Windows, then you can get the binary. But with Linux, it's a pain. Thank you for watching.